I'm Elena, your host, and today we are unlocking the most powerful social skill in the English language, the ability to tell a captivating story. I hear the same complaint from advanced learners every single day. You have the grammar, you have the vocabulary, and you have incredible life experiences. But when you sit down at a dinner party or a coffee break to tell a story in English, something goes wrong. You sound robotic. You simply list facts. I went there, then this happened, then I went home. The pacing is flat, the suspense is missing, and within 30 seconds, you notice that native speakers are secretly checking their phones. Today, that ends. We are going to master the hidden architecture of the English anecdote. Storytelling is not a magical talent. It is a highly structured system of hooks, pauses, exaggerations, and transitions. Native speakers use very specific phrases to build tension, to make the ordinary sound extraordinary, and to hold the attention of the room so that nobody dares to look away. Today, we are unlocking 200 advanced phrases for magnetic storytelling. 8 categories, 25 phrases each. I will give you the definition, the conversational context, and a real-world example. Your job is to repeat every example out loud after me. You must train your mouth to feel the rhythm and the pacing of these phrases. Let us turn your memories into masterpieces. Let us begin. Category 1, the magnetic hook. How to start a story and demand attention. The first 5 seconds of a story decide everything. If you start weakly, you lose the room. These 25 phrases are designed to grab the listener by the collar and force them to pay attention. Word 1. So get this. Definition. An informal but incredibly powerful command to listen. What it captures. The pure excitement of sharing a secret. Example. I was waiting in line for coffee, and so get this. The CEO of the company walks in wearing slippers. Repeat. So get this. Word 2. You are never going to believe. Definition. A promise that the story you are about to tell defies all logic. What it captures. Setting the expectation of absolute shock. Example. You are never going to believe what happened to me on the train this morning. Repeat. You are never going to believe. Word 3. Picture the scene. Definition. A command for the listener to close their eyes and visualize exactly what you saw. What it captures. The beginning of a cinematic experience. Example. Picture the scene. It is midnight, pouring rain, and my car is completely dead. Repeat. Picture the scene. Word 4. So there I was. Definition. A dramatic phrase used to drop the listener directly into the middle of the action. What it captures. The sudden freeze frame of a chaotic moment. Example. So there I was, standing in front of the entire board of directors with the wrong presentation. Repeat. So there I was. Word 5. I'm minding my own business. Definition. Establishing your innocence before something crazy happens to you. What it captures. The calm before the storm. Example. I'm just sitting there, minding my own business, when this woman starts screaming at the waiter. Repeat. I'm minding my own business. Word 6. To give you some context. Definition. Pausing the action to provide necessary background information. What it captures. The director stepping in to explain the plot. Example. To give you some context. My brother and I had not spoken in 3 years. Repeat. To give you some context. Word 7. It all started when, definition, tracing a massive disaster back to one tiny, seemingly innocent moment. What it captures, the first domino falling over. Example, it all started when I decided to try and fix the plumbing myself. Repeat, it all started when. Word 8, against my better judgment. Definition, admitting that you knew a decision was terrible, but you did it anyway. What it captures, the universal human experience of making a stupid choice. Example, against my better judgment, I agreed to look after their dog for the weekend. Repeat, against my better judgment. Word 9, I should preface this by saying. Definition, giving a warning or a disclaimer before the story actually begins. What it captures, setting the emotional rules for the listener. Example, I should preface this by saying that I am terrified of heights. Repeat, I should preface this by saying. Word 10, as luck would have it. Definition, introducing a massive coincidence, which can be either wonderfully good or terribly bad. What it captures, the unpredictable wheel of fate. Example, I forgot my passport and, as luck would have it, the traffic was the worst it has been all year. Repeat, as luck would have it. Word 11, out of the blue. Definition, something happening completely without warning. What it captures, a lightning strike on a perfectly sunny day. Example, we had not spoken for months when, out of the blue, she called me at 2 a.m. Repeat, out of the blue. Word 12, legend has it. Definition, a sarcastic or dramatic way to introduce a rumor or a known fact. What it captures, the tone of an ancient storyteller around a campfire. Example, legend has it, the marketing team is still trying to figure out how to use the printer. Repeat, legend has it. Word 13, if memory serves. Definition, a polite way of recalling a specific detail while leaving room for error. What it captures, the gentle dusting off of an old memory. Example, if memory serves, it was a Tuesday when the entire system crashed. Repeat, if memory serves. Word 14, just to set the stage. Definition, preparing the emotional or physical environment for the listener. What it captures, turning down the house lights before the play begins. Example, just to set the stage, we had both been awake for 36 hours. Repeat, just to set the stage. Word 15, I was completely oblivious. Definition, admitting that you had no idea a disaster was approaching. What it captures, the innocence of walking blindly toward a cliff. Example, they were planning a surprise party and I was completely oblivious. Repeat, I was completely oblivious. Word 16, without missing a beat. Definition, describing someone reacting perfectly and instantly to a surprise. What it captures, the absolute rhythm of a professional. Example, the glass shattered and, without missing a beat, the waiter handed me a towel. Repeat, without missing a beat. Word 17, before I knew it. Definition, describing how quickly a situation escalated out of control. What it captures, the sudden acceleration of a fast car. Example: we went in for one drink and, before I knew it, it was 3 in the morning. Repeat: before I knew it. Word 18. I cannot stress this enough. Definition: pausing the story to highlight a fact that is absolutely critical to the plot. What it captures: grabbing the listener by the shoulders to make sure they understand. Example: the door was locked, and I cannot stress this enough, my phone was inside the room. Repeat: I cannot stress this enough. Word 19. For the record. Definition: making a formal statement of your innocence or intention before telling a bad story. What it captures: speaking directly to the jury. Example: for the record, I told them it was a terrible idea. Repeat: for the record. Word 20. Stop me if you've heard this one. Definition: a polite introduction to a story that you might have told before. What it captures: the self-awareness of a frequent storyteller. Example: stop me if you've heard this one, but did I ever tell you about my trip to Tokyo? Repeat: stop me if you've heard this one. Word 21. Fast forward to. Definition: skipping the boring parts of a timeline to get straight to the action. What it captures: pressing the skip button on a movie remote. Example: the flight was delayed. Fast forward to midnight, and we are sleeping on the airport floor. Repeat: fast forward to. Word 22. It goes without saying. Definition: stating a fact that is so obvious it shouldn't need to be spoken. What it captures: the establishment of absolute common sense. Example: it goes without saying that I was absolutely terrified. Repeat: it goes without saying. Word 23. You have to understand. Definition: pleading with the listener to grasp the emotional weight of a situation. What it captures: the desperate need for empathy. Example: you have to understand. I had never spoken in front of a crowd before. Repeat: you have to understand. Word 24. I'm not going to lie. Definition: a phrase used to introduce a slightly embarrassing truth. What it captures: dropping the mask of perfection. Example: I'm not going to lie. I actually cried a little bit when it happened. Repeat: I'm not going to lie. Word 25. Bear in mind. Definition: asking the listener to hold a specific fact in their head while they listen to the rest of the story. What it captures: handing the listener a piece of the puzzle. Example: bear in mind, I had only been working there for 3 days. Repeat: bear in mind. Category 2. Building the tension, pacing, and suspense. Once you have hooked the room, you cannot let them go. Advanced storytellers do not rush. They slow down. These 25 phrases are the glue that holds the story together. They are filler phrases that sound incredibly dramatic. Word 26. And just when I thought. Definition: the pivot point where a bad situation suddenly becomes much worse. What it captures: the false dawn before the real darkness. Example, and just when I thought the meeting was over, the CEO walked in. Repeat, and just when I thought. Word 27, out of nowhere. Definition, a sudden, shocking appearance of a problem. What it captures, a jump scare in a horror movie. Example, I was walking down the street and, out of nowhere, this massive dog jumps on me. Repeat, out of nowhere. Word 28, next thing I know. Definition, a phrase that perfectly captures the chaos and confusion of a fast-moving situation. What it captures, blinking and realizing the world has changed. Example, I closed my eyes for 5 seconds and, next thing I know, the alarm is going off. Repeat, next thing I know. Word 29, at this point. Definition, pausing the timeline to evaluate the emotional state of the room. What it captures, looking around to assess the damage. Example, at this point, nobody has spoken a word for 10 minutes. Repeat, at this point. Word 30, lo and behold. Definition, a slightly sarcastic, theatrical way of introducing a predictable but terrible outcome. What it captures, the cynical sigh of a magician pulling a dead rabbit out of a hat. Example, I checked the oven and, lo and behold, the chicken was completely burnt. Repeat, lo and behold. Word 31, to make matters worse. Definition, introducing a new problem that compounds the original disaster. What it captures, pouring gasoline directly onto a fire. Example, my tire was flat and, to make matters worse, it started pouring rain. Repeat, to make matters worse. Word 32, in the blink of an eye. Definition, describing something that happened so fast it barely registered. What it captures, the absolute speed of an accident. Example, in the blink of an eye, the entire glass table completely shattered. Repeat, in the blink of an eye. Word 33, little did I know. Definition, highlighting the tragic innocence of your past self. What it captures, the dramatic irony of knowing the ending before the character does. Example, little did I know the microphone had been on the entire time. Repeat, little did I know. Word 34, sure enough. Definition, confirming that your worst suspicion was exactly right. What it captures, the grim satisfaction of being correct about a disaster. Example, I checked the bank account and, sure enough, the money was completely gone. Repeat, sure enough. Word 35, thick as thieves. Definition, describing two people who are incredibly close and secretly cooperating. What it captures, the whispered conspiracy of best friends. Example, within an hour, those two were thick as thieves. Repeat, thick as thieves. Word 36, it dawned on me. Definition, the slow, horrifying realization of the truth. What it captures, the sun slowly rising to illuminate a monster. Example, halfway through the interview, it dawned on me that I had applied for the wrong job. Repeat, it dawned on me. Word 37, catch 22. Definition, a paradoxical situation from which an individual cannot escape because of contradictory rules. What it captures, being trapped in a logical nightmare. Example, you need experience to get the job, but you need the job to get experience. It is a total catch-22. Repeat, catch-22. Word 38, it turns out. Definition, the classic pivot phrase revealing the final truth behind a mystery. What it captures, pulling the mask off the villain. Example, it turns out she hadn't actually sent the email at all. Repeat, it turns out. Word 39, meanwhile. Definition, shifting the camera to a different part of the story that is happening at the exact same time. What it captures, the split screen of an action movie. Example, I was waiting at the front door. Meanwhile, he was waiting at the back door. Repeat, meanwhile. Word 40, as if that wasn't enough. Definition, a transition used to pile more misery onto an already terrible situation. What it captures, dropping an anvil on someone who is already trapped under a rock. Example, as if that wasn't enough, my car got towed while we were arguing. Repeat, as if that wasn't enough. Word 41, on the verge of. Definition, describing the exact moment right before an explosion or a breakdown. What it captures, standing on the absolute edge of a cliff. Example, by the third hour of the flight, I was on the verge of a complete panic attack. Repeat, on the verge of. Word 42, the plot thickens. Definition, a playful, theatrical phrase used when a story suddenly gets much more complicated. What it captures, the swirling of a mystery. Example, she claimed she was at home, but her car was at the office. The plot thickens. Repeat, the plot thickens. Word 43, by a stroke of luck. Definition, describing an incredibly fortunate coincidence that saves the day. What it captures, dodging a bullet by 1 millimeter. Example, by a stroke of luck, I found my keys sitting directly on the bumper. Repeat, by a stroke of luck. Word 44, in the heat of the moment. Definition, an excuse for doing something completely irrational because you were overwhelmed by emotion. What it captures, the temporary insanity of anger or panic. Example, I threw the phone in the lake. I just panicked in the heat of the moment. Repeat, in the heat of the moment. Word 45, the final straw. Definition, the last minor annoyance that causes a complete mental breakdown. What it captures, a tiny feather breaking a camel's back. Example, the printer jamming again was the final straw. I just walked out. Repeat. The final straw. Word 46. To my absolute horror. Definition. Introducing a visual that completely shocked and terrified you. What it captures. The cold sweat of sudden fear. Example. I opened the suitcase and, to my absolute horror, it was completely empty. Repeat. To my absolute horror. Word 47. Long story short. Definition. The universal phrase for skipping the boring details and jumping straight to the conclusion. What it captures. The merciful end of a long explanation. Example. Long story short, we had to pay $500 to get the car back. Repeat. Long story short. Word 48. Hindsight is 20/20. Definition. Admitting that a mistake is incredibly obvious now, but was impossible to see at the time. What it captures. The painful clarity of looking backwards. Example. I never should have trusted him, but hindsight is 20/20. Repeat. Hindsight is 20/20. Word 49. Against all odds. Definition. Achieving something that was mathematically almost impossible. What it captures. The triumphant music playing at the end of a movie. Example. Against all odds, we actually made the flight with 2 minutes to spare. Repeat. Against all odds. Word 50. As fate would have it. Definition. Similar to as luck would have it, but with a grander, more philosophical tone. What it captures. The invisible hand of the universe pushing you forward. Example. As fate would have it, the one day I wore sweatpants, I ran into my boss. Repeat. As fate would have it. Category 3, exaggeration and color. Painting with hyperbole. The difference between a boring report and a hilarious anecdote is the deliberate use of exaggeration. Native speakers rarely tell the exact literal truth when they are trying to be funny. They stretch the colors to make the painting brighter. These 25 phrases are the brushes you will use. Word 51. I was absolutely dying. Definition. A massive exaggeration used to describe extreme embarrassment, laughter, or exhaustion. What it captures. The feeling of wanting the ground to open and swallow you. Example. When I realized I was wearing mismatched shoes, I was absolutely dying. Repeat. I was absolutely dying. Word 52. Literally the worst thing. Definition. The dramatic inflation of a minor inconvenience into a global tragedy. What it captures. The comedic complaining of modern life. Example. Getting stuck behind a slow walker is literally the worst thing in the world. Repeat. Literally the worst thing. Word 53. A million miles away. Definition. Describing someone who is physically present but completely lost in their own thoughts. What it captures. The blank stare of absolute distraction. Example. I was talking to him, but his mind was 1,000,000 miles away. Repeat, 1,000,000 miles away. Word 54, weighed a ton. Definition: exaggerating the physical heaviness of an object to make yourself sound like a martyr. What it captures: dragging a boulder up a mountain. Example: I carried that suitcase up 5 flights of stairs and it weighed a ton. Repeat, weighed a ton. Word 55, scared to death. Definition: the dramatic expression for being startled or deeply frightened. What it captures: the heart jumping entirely out of the chest. Example: when the alarm went off in the dark, I was scared to death. Repeat, scared to death. Word 56, took forever. Definition: describing any waiting period longer than 5 minutes with total theatrical agony. What it captures: the melting clocks of boredom. Example: we stood in that queue and it absolutely took forever. Repeat, took forever. Word 57, I nearly had a heart attack. Definition: the physical exaggeration of absolute shock. What it captures: the sharp intake of breath when something goes wrong. Example: when I saw the final bill for the dinner, I nearly had a heart attack. Repeat, I nearly had a heart attack. Word 58, freezing to death. Definition: the classic complaint for feeling slightly cold. What it captures: the dramatic shiver in an air-conditioned room. Example: can we please close the window? I am freezing to death over here. Repeat, freezing to death. Word 59, boiling alive. Definition: the exact opposite, used the moment the sun comes out. What it captures: the theatrical sweating of a summer commute. Example: the train broke down in the tunnel and we were boiling alive. Repeat, boiling alive. Word 60, starving to death. Definition: the dramatic proclamation made when a meal is 30 minutes late. What it captures: the urgent panic of an empty stomach. Example: let us order the food right now. I am starving to death. Repeat, starving to death. Word 61, in a million years. Definition: a hyperbole used to declare that an event was completely and absolutely unimaginable. What it captures: the sheer impossibility of the situation. Example: never in a million years did I think I would end up living in London. Repeat, in a million years. Word 62, sick and tired. Definition: the emotional exaggeration of complete exhaustion with a situation. What it captures: the heavy sigh of total burnout. Example: I am absolutely sick and tired of having this exact same argument. Repeat, sick and tired. Word 63, mind-blowing. Definition: describing a fact or event that is so impressive, it completely shatters your reality. What it captures: the brain exploding with new information. Example: the special effects in that movie were absolutely mind-blowing. Repeat: mind-blowing. Word 64. A total disaster. Definition: upgrading a minor mistake to the level of a natural catastrophe. What it captures: the smoking ruins of a failed plan. Example: I tried to bake a cake and the kitchen is a total disaster. Repeat: a total disaster. Word 65. Dead on my feet. Definition: the physical exaggeration of absolute total exhaustion. What it captures: a zombie walking aimlessly through a hallway. Example: after working a 14-hour shift, I was absolutely dead on my feet. Repeat: dead on my feet. Word 66. A drop in the ocean. Definition: minimizing a large amount by comparing it to something infinitely bigger. What it captures: the feeling of complete insignificance. Example: they gave us a tiny budget, but it is just a drop in the ocean of what we actually need. Repeat: a drop in the ocean. Word 67. Jumping out of my skin. Definition: the physical manifestation of intense anxiety or sudden fear. What it captures: the electric shock of being startled. Example: when the phone rang at midnight, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Repeat: jumping out of my skin. Word 68. Biting my tongue. Definition: the painful physical effort required to stop yourself from saying something rude. What it captures: chewing on your own mouth to trap the words inside. Example: I completely disagreed with the boss, but I was just biting my tongue the whole time. Repeat: biting my tongue. Word 69. Banging my head against a brick wall. Definition: the absolute futility of trying to convince someone who will not listen. What it captures: the bloody frustration of endless repetition. Example: trying to teach him how to use the software is like banging my head against a brick wall. Repeat: banging my head against a brick wall. Word 70. Like pulling teeth. Definition: exaggerating the agonizing difficulty of getting someone to do something. What it captures: the slow, painful extraction of cooperation. Example: getting the kids ready for school this morning was like pulling teeth. Repeat: like pulling teeth. Word 71. The end of the world. Definition: the ultimate hyperbole, usually used in the negative to calm someone down. What it captures: the apocalypse. Example: I know you failed the exam, but it is not the end of the world. Repeat: the end of the world. Word 72. A breath of fresh air. Definition: describing someone or something that is wonderfully new and refreshing. What it captures. Opening a window in a stuffy room. Example. The new manager is so positive. She is a total breath of fresh air. Repeat. A breath of fresh air. Word 73. Cost an arm and a leg. Definition. The dramatic financial exaggeration of something incredibly expensive. What it captures. The bloody sacrifice of paying the bill. Example. I would love to buy that car, but it costs an arm and a leg. Repeat. Cost an arm and a leg. Word 74. Out of this world. Definition. Elevating a compliment beyond the atmosphere of the planet. What it captures. The sheer majesty of absolute perfection. Example. You have to try this chocolate cake. It is entirely out of this world. Repeat. Out of this world. Word 75. Over the moon. Definition. The emotional peak of absolute joy and excitement. What it captures. Floating in the anti-gravity of pure happiness. Example. When she found out she got the promotion, she was absolutely over the moon. Repeat. Over the moon. Category 4. Holding the floor. Navigating interruptions gracefully. A casual conversation is not a monologue. People will interrupt you. They will ask questions, and you will lose your train of thought. Advanced storytellers know exactly how to manage the chaos and steer the room back to the narrative. These 25 phrases are your steering wheel. Word 76. Where was I? Definition. The universal question used to gracefully recover after an interruption. What it captures. A compass searching for true north. Example. That is a great question. Anyway, where was I? Ah, yes, the airport. Repeat. Where was I? Word 77. As I was saying. Definition. A slightly firmer phrase used to politely ignore a distraction and return to the plot. What it captures. The strict teacher clapping their hands for attention. Example. As I was saying before the phone rang, we need to leave by 6. Repeat. As I was saying. Word 78. But I digress. Definition. A sophisticated admission that you have wandered away from the main story. What it captures. Catching yourself daydreaming and pulling yourself back to reality. Example. I could talk about Italian food for hours, but I digress. Back to the story. Repeat. But I digress. Word 79. Bear with me. Definition. A polite request for the listener's patience when the story gets complicated or you lose your place. What it captures. Holding up a gentle hand for a moment of grace. Example. Bear with me for a second. I am trying to remember his exact words. Repeat. Bear with me. Word 80. To get back to the point. Definition. A firm transition used when the group conversation has drifted too far away. What it captures. Grabbing the steering wheel and yanking it hard to the right. Example. We are getting totally off topic. To get back to the point, the budget is gone. Repeat. To get back to the point. Word 81. That reminds me. Definition. The perfect pivot phrase to seamlessly launch into a completely different story. What it captures. A spark jumping from one fire to another. Example. Talking about terrible vacations, that reminds me of my trip to Paris. Repeat. That reminds me. Word 82. Let me finish. Definition. A direct command used when someone is repeatedly interrupting the climax of your story. What it captures. The absolute boundary of the storyteller. Example. No, wait, let me finish, because the ending is the best part. Repeat. Let me finish. Word 83. I lost my train of thought. Definition. The honest admission that your brain has completely blanked out. What it captures. Watching the train leave the station without you. Example. I was going to make a profound point, but I completely lost my train of thought. Repeat. I lost my train of thought. Word 84. Long story short. Definition. We revisit this phrase specifically as a rescue tool when you realize you are boring the room. What it captures. Hitting the emergency fast-forward button. Example. I could give you all the technical details, but long story short, the car is dead. Repeat. Long story short. Word 85. Anyway. Definition. The ultimate conversational reset button, used to abruptly end an awkward pause or a bad joke. What it captures. Sweeping the mess off the table and starting over. Example. So that was a complete disaster. Anyway, how is your new job? Repeat. Anyway. Word 86. I'm getting ahead of myself. Definition. Catching yourself revealing the ending before you have explained the beginning. What it captures. Hitting the brakes because you are driving too fast. Example. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what happened first. Repeat. I'm getting ahead of myself. Word 87. Does that make sense? Definition. Checking in with the audience to ensure they are following a complicated plot. What it captures. The teacher scanning the room for confused faces. Example. So the cousin is actually married to the boss. Does that make sense? Repeat. Does that make sense? Word 88. Don't quote me on this. Definition. A disclaimer used before giving a fact that might be entirely incorrect. What it captures. Putting up an umbrella before the rain of criticism starts. Example. Don't quote me on this, but I think the company is going bankrupt. Repeat. Don't quote me on this. Word 89. If I remember correctly. Definition. Softening a statement of fact to avoid looking arrogant if you are wrong. What it captures. The polite hesitation of memory. Example. If I remember correctly, he was wearing a bright yellow suit. Repeat. If I remember correctly. Word 90. You know what I mean? Definition. A casual check-in used to build solidarity and ensure the listener shares your feeling. What it captures. the invisible nod of human connection. Example: it was just one of those days where nothing goes right. You know what I mean? Repeat. You know what I mean? Word 91. To cut a long story short. Definition: the British cousin of long story short, offering a slightly more elegant wrapping up of a tedious tale. What it captures: taking a pair of scissors to a tangled ribbon. Example: to cut a long story short, we missed the train and had to walk. Repeat. To cut a long story short. Word 92. I wouldn't go that far. Definition: gently correcting a listener who has interrupted you with an exaggeration of their own. What it captures: cooling down boiling water with a splash of ice. Example: well, I wouldn't go that far. It wasn't a tragedy, but it was certainly annoying. Repeat. I wouldn't go that far. Word 93. Let me put it this way. Definition: restarting an explanation because the first attempt completely failed. What it captures: rebuilding the house with entirely different bricks. Example: let me put it this way. If we don't finish by Friday, we are all fired. Repeat. Let me put it this way. Word 94. Which brings me to definition: the professional pivot used to connect a seemingly random tangent back to the main topic. What it captures: tying a perfect knot at the end of a rope. Example: I spent 3 years studying psychology, which brings me to my next point. Repeat. Which brings me to word 95. At the end of the day. Definition: the classic summarization phrase used to dismiss details and focus on the final truth. What it captures: the sun setting on all the arguments. Example: we can debate the cost, but at the end of the day, we need a new roof. Repeat. At the end of the day. Word 96. Funny you should say that. Definition: seizing upon a listener's interruption to launch into your next perfect point. What it captures: catching a ball thrown by a friend and throwing it right back. Example: funny you should say that, because I actually saw him yesterday. Repeat. Funny you should say that. Word 97. Speaking of which. Definition: using a random word the listener just said to smoothly transition to your own story. What it captures: stepping on a stone to cross a river. Example: speaking of bad restaurants, let me tell you what happened on my date. Repeat. Speaking of which. Word 98. It goes back to what I was saying. Definition: tying a loose end directly back to your original thesis. What it captures: closing the circle of logic. Example: it goes back to what I was saying earlier about trusting your instincts. Repeat. It goes back to what I was saying. Word 99. Wait for it. Definition: a playful command demanding absolute silence right before the punchline. What it captures: holding a match over the dynamite. Example: she opened the box and, wait for it, it was completely empty. Repeat. Wait for it. Word 100. And that is how. Definition: The absolute, definitive, concluding phrase of a perfectly told story. What it captures. Dropping the microphone on the stage. Example. And that is how I accidentally ended up adopting 3 stray cats. Repeat. And that is how. Category 5. The comedic pause. Mastering silence and timing. A great story is not just about the words you use. It is about the spaces between the words. Advanced storytellers use specific phrases to force the audience to stop, take a breath, and fully absorb a ridiculous moment. Word 101. Let that sink in. Definition. A command for the audience to sit in silence and truly think about how absurd a fact is. What it captures. Waiting for the echo of a loud bell to fade away. Example. He actually charged his own mother for the dinner. Let that sink in. Repeat. Let that sink in. Word 102. I kid you not. Definition. A solemn promise that you are not inventing the ridiculous detail you just shared. What it captures. Raising your right hand in a courtroom. Example. He pulled a live bird out of his jacket. I kid you not. Repeat. I kid you not. Word 103. And I just stood there. Definition. Describing a moment of absolute physical paralysis caused by shock. What it captures. A statue frozen in the middle of a disaster. Example. The cake slowly slid off the table and crashed onto the floor. And I just stood there. Repeat. And I just stood there. Word 104. You could hear a pin drop. Definition. The classic exaggeration of absolute, stunned silence in a room. What it captures. The terrifying quiet after a massive mistake is made. Example. When she called the boss by his ex-wife's name, you could hear a pin drop. Repeat. You could hear a pin drop. Word 105. Dead silence. Definition. A more abrupt and aggressive way to describe a lack of response. What it captures. The sudden unplugging of a radio. Example. I told my best joke and the response was just dead silence. Repeat. Dead silence. Word 106. I was speechless. Definition. The admission that a situation was so crazy it completely stole your vocabulary. What it captures. A fish opening and closing its mouth with no sound coming out. Example. When he asked me to pay for the broken window, I was completely speechless. Repeat. I was speechless. Word 107. Not a word was spoken. Definition. Emphasizing the physical tension of two people staring at each other. What it captures. The quiet standoff in a Western movie. Example. We stared at the ruined painting for 5 minutes. Not a word was spoken. Repeat. Not a word was spoken. Word 108. I could not believe my eyes. Definition. a theatrical way of expressing absolute visual disbelief. What it captures: rubbing your eyes like a cartoon character. Example: when the car rolled backwards into the pool, I could not believe my eyes. Repeat: I could not believe my eyes. Word 109. Time stood still. Definition: describing the psychological slow motion of a terrifying or embarrassing moment. What it captures: a clock completely stopping its ticking. Example: as the coffee spilled toward his white shirt, time basically stood still. Repeat: time stood still. Word 110. Crickets. Definition: a modern slang expression for absolute silence after you expect a reaction. What it captures: the sound of insects in an empty field at night. Example: I asked if anyone wanted to volunteer to work the weekend. Absolute crickets. Repeat: crickets. Word 111. To put it mildly. Definition: an understatement used immediately after a wild description to create comedic contrast. What it captures: sipping tea calmly while the house burns down. Example: it was not a successful date. To put it mildly. Repeat: to put it mildly. Word 112. Without batting an eye. Definition: describing someone who reacts to crazy news with zero emotion. What it captures: a robot processing terrible data. Example: I told him the budget was gone and, without batting an eye, he just nodded. Repeat: without batting an eye. Word 113. Straight-faced. Definition: maintaining complete seriousness while saying or doing something absurd. What it captures: a comedian refusing to laugh at their own joke. Example: he looked at me, completely straight-faced, and asked if whales could fly. Repeat: straight-faced. Word 114. I had to do a double take. Definition: looking away and then snapping your head back because you cannot believe what you just saw. What it captures: the physical whiplash of surprise. Example: I walked past the window and had to do a double take when I saw the monkey. Repeat: I had to do a double take. Word 115. Flabbergasted. Definition: a delightfully old-fashioned word meaning absolutely stunned into silence. What it captures: the jaw dropping completely to the floor. Example: when I saw the final price tag on the menu, I was completely flabbergasted. Repeat: flabbergasted. Word 116. Jaw dropped. Definition: the literal physical description of open-mouthed shock. What it captures: the face losing all muscle control in surprise. Example: my jaw dropped when she walked in wearing a wedding dress to a casual dinner. Repeat: jaw dropped. Word 117. I froze. Definition: the animal instinct of becoming perfectly still when in danger. What it captures: a deer caught in the headlights of a truck. Example: I heard the floorboard creak in the empty house, and I just completely froze. Repeat. I froze. Word 118. Caught off guard. Definition. Being surprised when your defenses were completely down. What it captures. Dropping your shield right before the arrow hits. Example. The question about my past completely caught me off guard. Repeat. Caught off guard. Word 119. Taken aback. Definition. A slightly more formal expression for being startled by someone's audacity. What it captures. Physically stepping backward away from a rude comment. Example. I was quite taken aback when he asked how much money I make. Repeat. Taken aback. Word 120. Deer in headlights. Definition. Looking completely panicked and unable to make a decision. What it captures. The bright, blinding light of unexpected pressure. Example. When the teacher called on me, I looked like an absolute deer in headlights. Repeat. Deer in headlights. Word 121. You could have knocked me over with a feather. Definition. Being so shocked that you lose all physical strength. What it captures. A gust of wind blowing over a heavy statue. Example. When I heard they were getting a divorce, you could have knocked me over with a feather. Repeat. You could have knocked me over with a feather. Word 122. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Definition. The ultimate emotional paralysis when a situation is both hilarious and tragic. What it captures. Standing perfectly balanced on a tightrope of emotion. Example. When the dog ate my passport, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Repeat. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Word 123. A pregnant pause. Definition. A silence that is heavy with expectation or tension. What it captures. The air being sucked out of a room before an explosion. Example. He asked her to marry him, and there was this massive, pregnant pause. Repeat. A pregnant pause. Word 124. Words failed me. Definition. The absolute inability to formulate a sentence. What it captures. Reaching into a toolbox and finding it completely empty. Example. I wanted to scream at him, but honestly, words just failed me. Repeat. Words failed me. Word 125. Let's just say. Definition. A brilliant pause phrase used to imply something terrible without having to describe the explicit details. What it captures. Pulling the curtain closed right before the violence starts. Example. Let's just say he won't be invited back to the restaurant anytime soon. Repeat. Let's just say. Category 6. Bringing characters to life. Reporting dialogue. A story is incredibly boring if you just summarize what people said. Advanced storytellers act out the dialogue. They use rhythm and specific reporting verbs to put the listener directly in the room with the characters. Word 126. He turns to me and says. Definition. A present tense transition that immediately pulls the listener into the action. What it captures. the camera suddenly zooming in on the villain's face. Example: we are sitting in the dark, and he turns to me and says, "I forgot the keys." Repeat. He turns to me and says. Word 127. I look him dead in the eye. Definition: establishing absolute dominance or intense seriousness before delivering a line. What it captures: two cowboys staring each other down at noon. Example: I look him dead in the eye and say, "Absolutely not." Repeat. I look him dead in the eye. Word 128. So I'm thinking to myself. Definition: sharing your inner monologue to contrast with what was actually happening outside. What it captures: the secret voiceover in a movie scene. Example: he is talking for 20 minutes, and I'm thinking to myself, how do I escape? Repeat. So I'm thinking to myself. Word 129. She goes. Definition: the casual, conversational replacement for she said that builds incredible speed in a story. What it captures: the rapid-fire rhythm of gossip. Example: I told her it was expensive, and she goes, "I don't care, I want it." Repeat. She goes. Word 130. I was like. Definition: the most common modern English phrase for expressing a reaction, whether spoken or felt. What it captures: holding up a mirror to your own emotional state. Example: when I saw the size of the spider, I was like, I am moving to another country. Repeat. I was like. Word 131. Word for word. Definition: a guarantee that the crazy quote you are about to share is 100% accurate. What it captures: handing the listener an exact transcript. Example: I am telling you, word for word, he said he didn't care about the money. Repeat. Word for word. Word 132. Quote unquote. Definition: emphasizing a specific phrase someone used, usually to mock it or show you disagree with it. What it captures: drawing air quotes with your fingers. Example: he claimed it was a quote-unquote minor technical issue. Repeat. Quote-unquote. Word 133. Out of his own mouth. Definition: providing absolute proof that someone said something terrible. What it captures: the smoking gun in a murder trial. Example: I heard him say he hated the project, straight out of his own mouth. Repeat. Out of his own mouth. Word 134. I said to him. I said. Definition: a rhythmic repetition used to build up to your own brilliant comeback. What it captures: pumping your fist before throwing a punch. Example: I said to him, I said, "You cannot speak to me that way." Repeat. I said to him, I said. Word 135. And I quote. Definition: a formal, theatrical way to introduce a ridiculous statement. What it captures: reading from a royal scroll. Example. His exact response was, and I quote, "I prefer to sleep during the day." Repeat. And I quote. Word 136. She had the nerve to say. Definition. Expressing total outrage at someone's audacity. What it captures. The dramatic gasp of an offended aristocrat. Example. After ruining my dress, she had the nerve to say it looked better that way. Repeat. She had the nerve to say. Word 137. He muttered under his breath. Definition. Describing someone saying something quietly because they are cowardly or angry. What it captures. The toxic whisper of resentment. Example. As he walked away, he muttered something terrible under his breath. Repeat. He muttered under his breath. Word 138. Screaming at the top of her lungs. Definition. The ultimate hyperbole for a loud argument. What it captures. An opera singer shattering glass. Example. By the time I arrived, they were screaming at the top of their lungs. Repeat. Screaming at the top of her lungs. Word 139. I kept my mouth shut. Definition. The agonizing decision not to speak your mind. What it captures. Swallowing a bitter pill whole. Example. I knew they were making a mistake, but I just kept my mouth shut. Repeat. I kept my mouth shut. Word 140. Blurted out. Definition. Saying something completely inappropriate because you couldn't control your brain. What it captures. A champagne cork popping in a silent church. Example. Before I could stop myself, I just blurted out the secret. Repeat. Blurted out. Word 141. Spitting mad. Definition. Describing someone who is so angry that words are practically weaponized. What it captures. A venomous snake striking its prey. Example. When he realized his car had been towed, he was absolutely spitting mad. Repeat. Spitting mad. Word 142. Talked my ear off. Definition. Describing someone who spoke endlessly and exhaustingly. What it captures. Being trapped in a corner by a verbal machine gun. Example. I sat next to him on the plane, and he talked my ear off for 6 hours. Repeat. Talked my ear off. Word 143. Couldn't get a word in edgewise. Definition. The frustrating experience of trying to speak while someone else refuses to stop talking. What it captures. Trying to jump onto a moving train. Example. She was so angry that I couldn't get a word in edgewise. Repeat. Couldn't get a word in edgewise. Word 144. The exact words out of my mouth. Definition. Confirming absolute agreement with someone else's statement. What it captures. Two people reading from the exact same script. Example. When you said that movie was terrible, you took the exact words out of my mouth. Repeat. The exact words out of my mouth. Word 145. Mincing words. Definition. Softening the truth to avoid offending someone, usually used in the negative to announce absolute honesty. What it captures: chopping the truth into tiny, harmless pieces. Example: I am not going to mince words. The presentation was a total disaster. Repeat: mincing words. Word 146. Preaching to the choir. Definition: trying to convince someone who already agrees with you completely. What it captures: shouting instructions to people who already know exactly what to do. Example: you don't have to convince me to leave early. You are preaching to the choir. Repeat: preaching to the choir. Word 147. Beat around the bush. Definition: avoiding the main topic because it is uncomfortable. What it captures: walking in circles around the treasure instead of digging. Example: stop beating around the bush and just tell me how much it costs. Repeat: beat around the bush. Word 148. Spilled the beans. Definition: accidentally or deliberately revealing a massive secret. What it captures: knocking over a bowl of evidence onto a clean floor. Example: we were trying to keep the party a secret, but John completely spilled the beans. Repeat: spilled the beans. Word 149. Talked me into it. Definition: the act of being persuaded to do something you didn't want to do. What it captures: the slow, steady erosion of a stone wall. Example: I didn't want to go to the concert, but she eventually talked me into it. Repeat: talked me into it. Word 150. Having the last word. Definition: the aggressive need to win an argument by making the final statement. What it captures: slamming the door on your way out. Example: we argued for an hour, and he just had to have the last word. Repeat: having the last word. Category 7. The self-deprecating twist. Making yourself the punchline. The most likable storytellers never make themselves the hero. They make themselves the clown. If you want the room to love you, you have to show them your own foolishness. These 25 phrases are the ultimate armor, because if you make fun of yourself first, nobody else can. Word 151. In my infinite wisdom. Definition: a deeply sarcastic way to introduce a terrible decision you made. What it captures: wearing a wizard's hat while accidentally burning down the castle. Example: so, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to try and fix the washing machine myself. Repeat: in my infinite wisdom. Word 152. Because I'm a genius. Definition: the ironic confirmation of your own absolute stupidity. What it captures: applauding yourself for tripping over a flat surface. Example: I locked the keys inside the running car because I'm an absolute genius. Repeat: because I'm a genius. Word 153. Not my proudest moment. Definition: the gentle admission of an embarrassing failure. What it captures: slowly hanging your head in shame. Example: I dropped the entire tray of drinks on the client. Not my proudest moment. Repeat: not my proudest moment. Word 154. Graceful as ever. Definition: sarcastic commentary on your own physical clumsiness. What it captures: a ballerina falling flat on her face. Example: I tripped over the carpet and spilled wine everywhere. Graceful as ever. Repeat. Graceful as ever. Word 155. My brilliant plan. Definition. Describing a strategy that immediately and catastrophically failed. What it captures. A blueprint for a bridge that immediately collapses into the river. Example. My brilliant plan was to sneak in through the back door, which was locked. Repeat. My brilliant plan. Word 156. I made a complete fool of myself. Definition. The total, vulnerable admission of absolute social failure. What it captures. Stripping off your pride and leaving it on the floor. Example. I thought she was waving at me, and I waved back. I made a complete fool of myself. Repeat. I made a complete fool of myself. Word 157. Proving once again. Definition. Highlighting that your latest mistake is part of a lifelong pattern of failure. What it captures. Adding another trophy to your shelf of disasters. Example. I lost my phone on the first day of vacation, proving once again that I cannot have nice things. Repeat. Proving once again. Word 158. Story of my life. Definition. The ultimate sigh of resignation when something unlucky happens to you. What it captures. Reading the title of your own tragic biography. Example. The one day I forgot my umbrella, it rained for 6 hours. Story of my life. Repeat. Story of my life. Word 159. I have no one to blame but myself. Definition. Taking absolute ownership of a terrible outcome. What it captures. Looking in the mirror and pointing an angry finger. Example. I knew I should have checked the tires. I have no one to blame but myself. Repeat. I have no one to blame but myself. Word 160. Typical me. Definition. Laughing off a mistake because it is perfectly aligned with your chaotic personality. What it captures. The warm, forgiving shrug of self-acceptance. Example. I arrived at the airport a day early. Typical me. Repeat. Typical me. Word 161. Just my luck. Definition. A sarcastic celebration of your own terrible karma. What it captures. Winning the lottery on the day the currency collapses. Example. The coffee machine broke right when it was my turn to order. Just my luck. Repeat. Just my luck. Word 162. I'm a walking disaster. Definition. A massive hyperbole used to apologize for a sequence of clumsy mistakes. What it captures. A hurricane wearing a business suit. Example. First I spilled the water, then I dropped my pen. I am an absolute walking disaster today. Repeat. I'm a walking disaster. Word 163. My fatal flaw. Definition. The literary description of the one weakness that always destroys you. What it captures. Achilles staring sadly at his own heel. Example. I just cannot resist buying books I will never read. It is my fatal flaw. Repeat. My fatal flaw. Word 164. Me being me. Definition. An excuse for chaotic behavior based entirely on your own established history. What it captures: the absolute inevitability of your own choices. Example: me being me. I decided to wait until the very last minute to pack my bags. Repeat. Me being me. Word 165. I should have known better. Definition: the painful realization that you possessed the knowledge to avoid a trap, but stepped in it anyway. What it captures: the deep sigh of a disappointed parent directed at yourself. Example: I trusted the cheap mechanic and the car broke down immediately. I should have known better. Repeat. I should have known better. Word 166. Master of disaster. Definition: a playful, rhyming title you give yourself when everything you touch breaks. What it captures: the ringmaster of a circus that is currently on fire. Example: let me try to fix the router, although I am the master of disaster. Repeat. Master of disaster. Word 167. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Definition: the universal defense for a decision that looks entirely insane in hindsight. What it captures: a lawyer defending a clown in court. Example: trying to give the cat a bath seemed like a good idea at the time. Repeat. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Word 168. I learned my lesson the hard way. Definition: acquiring wisdom through maximum pain rather than logical thought. What it captures: touching the hot stove instead of reading the warning label. Example: never book a hotel without reading the reviews. I learned my lesson the hard way. Repeat. I learned my lesson the hard way. Word 169. I was hopelessly out of my depth. Definition: admitting that you had absolutely no skill or knowledge for the situation you were in. What it captures: a non-swimmer thrown into the deep end of the ocean. Example: when they started discussing quantum physics at dinner, I was hopelessly out of my depth. Repeat. I was hopelessly out of my depth. Word 170. I have 2 left feet. Definition: the classic idiomatic apology for being a terrible dancer or incredibly clumsy. What it captures: the biological impossibility of walking gracefully. Example: please do not ask me to dance. I have 2 absolute left feet. Repeat. I have 2 left feet. Word 171. I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Definition: admitting that you were completely and utterly fooled by a trick or a lie. What it captures: a fish swallowing the entire fishing rod. Example: he told me the meeting was canceled and I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Repeat. I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Word 172. I wouldn't trust myself to. Definition: a hyperbolic admission of your own incompetence at a specific task. What it captures: handing over the steering wheel because you are legally blind. Example: I wouldn't trust myself to keep a plastic plant alive. Repeat. I wouldn't trust myself to. Word 173. With my track record. Definition: pointing to your history of failures as proof that your current failure was inevitable. What it captures: A gambler looking at a massive list of debts. Example: with my track record, I shouldn't be allowed to organize anything more complicated than lunch. Repeat. With my track record. Word 174. I let my ego get the best of me. Definition: the mature admission that pride caused your downfall. What it captures: a balloon popping because it was inflated too much. Example: